Good morning. Thanks for having me here. I just wanted to speak today about the police budget and about the demands that were made um, by many Winnipeggers over the past few years for defunding the police. Um, and um, these demands were very nuanced and detailed, and they're they're included in a petition that Justice for Black Lives Winnipeg created in 2020 that now has 120,806 signatures. Um, and there are very specific reforms that this petition demands that City Council make. And I just wanted to lift these demands up and make sure that we're all still paying attention to them, because it's now almost 2022 and I'm not aware of any of these demands being taken seriously by City Council whatsoever. So I want to make sure that all Winnipeggers are aware of them, and that we put them on the record once again. So these demands include an immediate freeze to the Winnipeg Police Service budget. In other words, no increases to the Winnipeg Police Service budget, which, you know, to editorialize has really, City Council has really made a mockery of that demand in this past year, since it seems that the police dictate their own budget. There seems to be very little resistance to any idea that the police can't actually just decide how much money they want to spend and then spend it and then go back to City Council and demand that they receive that exact amount of money. As I'm sure you're all aware of, that this was quite embarrassing for the entire city, that City Council seems to just give Winnipeg Police Service the exact amount of money that it wants every year, and it keeps going up and up. Second, Justice for Black Lives Winnipeg and the 120,000 people that signed their petition demand total Winnipeg Police Service budget transparency. Third, we demand the defunding of all Winnipeg Police Service equipment and technology, from the helicopter to the robot dog to all the digital and computer technology that they use to surveil Winnipeggers, to put Winnipeggers on lists and track them down and criminalize them. We demand an immediate freeze to the Winnipeg Police Service overtime budget, which is egregious and immense. We demand an immediate cancellation of all cadet classes, towards a total freeze on all Winnipeg Police Service hiring. We don't want any more new police. We want fewer police on the streets. We want more social services. We want more nurses. We want more non-police emergency responders. We want more housing providers. We want fewer police. And let me just add here, because this nuance seems to be lost on some people, we don't want more lower paid police on our streets. We don't want more cadets on the streets. We don't want more police with worse pensions on the streets. Defunding the police in the sense that we use it in the Winnipeg community, in the sense that Justice for Black Lives uses it, is about reducing the presence of police in our lives. And that doesn't mean that isn't achieved by cutting police pensions. Cutting police pensions has nothing to do with the realities of policed Winnipeggers. That's not defunding the police, in my view. Police can keep their pensions for all I care, as long as they stop being police, and as long as there's fewer and fewer police in our lives, criminalizing us and disrupting families and disrupting lives every day. And then the last demand in the Justice for Black Lives Winnipeg petition, that again has over 120,000 signatures, is to defund the Winnipeg Police Service community relations, which of course balloons and balloons and balloons every year as a sort of counterinsurgency measure as the resistance in the community grows and grows and grows to policing and the presence of police in our lives. The the public relations of the police increases in order to try to refurbish the reputation of the police and the view that police actually are productive in our society and in our community, which is just not the case. And that's all I will leave you with today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Toews. Are there any questions? Councillor Mays?
Comments, a lot of comments there about missing nuance, and give us your thoughts then on the two announcements this week. One, the hiring of Ms. Tuesday. I think that was publicized yesterday, if perhaps the day before, and the announcement Monday in regard to the increased role of mental health practitioners working with the City of Winnipeg Police.
Thanks for that question, Councillor Mays. To be honest, I'll take the second one first. When I read about the proposal from the Winnipeg Police Service, and let me just summarize what I read about it, what the proposal actually is. So police will respond to a call the way that they normally would for well-being checks to people in distress, to people experiencing mental health crises. They'll respond in the exact same way that they would. And when I want to be clear, the kind of situation that I'm thinking of when I read the announcement about the new plan to have mental health workers involved in policing. I live near the corner of Sargent Street and Arlington. Sargent Avenue and Arlington Street. And I live a couple of blocks away from the 7-Eleven on Ellis Avenue and Arlington Street. And a year or two ago, someone experiencing a mental health crisis inside the 7-Eleven, who was attempting to rob the 7-Eleven, was shot. A young man, I believe he was a teenager, was shot by the police and nearly died, although fortunately he did survive that encounter with the police. So this is the kind of situation I'm thinking about when I hear proposals like this. So my understanding of the proposal is that police would respond to that in the exact same way that they would normally respond. So that young man being shot by the police and nearly dying would not have been prevented by this proposal. And my understanding, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that after they respond in the normal way, if they deem necessary that a mental health professional attend the scene, then they will call a mental health professional, and that mental health professional will attend to that person with a undercover police officer, or whatever the sort of new jargon is for undercover police officer. So it strikes me that this new proposal, doesn't prevent situations like that young man at the 7-Eleven on Ellis and Arlington being nearly killed by the police. Or as we read on the cover of the Free Press today, police, tasing a disabled person who didn't comply with police orders because he was afraid of the police. It wouldn't prevent situations like that whatsoever. B, I don't see the usefulness whatsoever of mental health workers and mental health care providers attending to people who require mental health care with an undercover police officer. I'm not sure how the presence of an undercover police officer aids in the provision of mental health care. I think a lot of people, for example, who are experiencing psychosis or are bipolar or what have you, are actually quite afraid of the police. And I think that would only exacerbate feelings of fear and what have you of authority figures, and especially authority figures who have the power to completely ruin their lives and possibly kill them. So that's my thoughts about that. To be honest, I'll be completely honest with you. My thoughts about the hiring of can you say her name again, Councillor Mays, please?
Angie Tuesday.
The hiring of Angie Tuesday. I feel like is more complicated because the Winnipeg police do have and police all over the country have such a miserable track record of serving Indigenous families of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And that's why we have a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, in part because of the failure of the police to respond to that problem for decades and decades and decades and decades. I don't. I think that families have been demanding something like that. So I think that is laudable to meet the demands of families. You know, I'm not sure that it really does much for policing as a whole. It seems like it's adding one position to the largest department at the city of Winnipeg, which has over, as you all know, a $300 million budget, and that is overwhelmingly directed at surveilling and criminalizing predominantly Indigenous people in this city. So it does nothing to reduce that focus. And that's all I'll say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. You mentioned reduction of police here in the city through defunding the police. Have you taken a look at the calls for service over the last several years and seen the increase in terms of calls for service that are initiated by citizens and residents of the city of Winnipeg?
Absolutely, I have some sense of that, and please do correct me if I'm wrong. But my sense of that is that the vast majority, or at least a quite sizable majority of calls to the police are for mental health crises, are for intimate partner violence, and for well-being checks. Is that your sense too, Councillor?
Yeah, and that was the response in terms of the ARC program that was announced on Monday, the alternative response for citizens in crisis, to deal with a lot of the well-being checks and those types of calls.
Right. So I think that the reality is that people are, the police themselves have admitted at times that those matters are not police matters. So the community has overwhelmingly demanded that situations like that, that we have a robust, well-funded, non-police alternative to respond to situations like that. So that's why when we call for defunding the police, we also call for a well-funded, robust, non-police emergency response that just simply does not exist right now. Because we know that police only escalate situations and aggravate situations, and often do take the lives of people in those situations.
Well, in terms of those situations, or some of those situations, it is about, well, mental health, but some of it is also about addictions and the unpredictability of the different situations that police are responding to. Are you advocating that an alternative response in terms of a mental health worker or a social worker to be put into those situations of unpredictability would be safer for the individual responding?
Absolutely, because when we have people that are oriented around de-escalation, that are oriented around that actually understand addictions and mental health crises, and don't respond by escalating situations and using force and making situations more dangerous for everyone, civilians, the people being directly responded to, and the emergency responder, I think that's always much safer.
So again, the psychoses of somebody who has taken methamphetamines, and again, the unpredictability around that, you're suggesting that a social worker or a mental health worker would be in a better position to de-escalate that situation and not come into harm's way.
Absolutely. I think that people experiencing psychosis, meth-induced or not, or any kind of behavior related to using substances, people around the city, in hospitals, in nonprofit organizations, in families, in schools, are responding to people in those situations every single day. And they're not, as far as I know, shooting people, or seriously injuring people, or sometimes killing people. So I think we need to draw on that experience and that expertise because it's proven to work.
What about the public safety in some of these situations? Because I've seen the unpredictability myself in terms of an individual, and I'm not a mental health specialist. I'm not a healthcare professional, but but I've seen the unpredictability of somebody in a psychosis that in terms of the public realm and public safety, the immediate area has been compromised in terms of safety. And that's something that we all need to be aware of. And if we're talking about public safety, it's not just about the one individual, it's about the environment that they're in.
Right. And I just want to re-emphasize too that people encounter unsafe situations in the city and in this life in the world all the time. Constantly, people encounter unsafe situations, and the number of unsafe situations that are responded to by police is actually quite minuscule compared to the whole range of unsafe situations that we all experience in our lives. And that I think that by investing more in police than in anything else that we invest in as a city, which we've done for a long time now, the number of unsafe situations that we find ourselves in has not gone down. So from that big picture perspective, we need to think about where we're investing our money and the level of safety that we're actually achieving.
So going back to your first point, you did mention about the police are the ones that set their budget amounts. Are you aware that it's council that actually sets the budget amount, brings that to the police board, who then works with the police service to come up with, to identify the risk in terms of the budget that has been presented by council? Are you aware that's the process and it's not an arbitrary process where it's the service that actually indicates or set what their budget limits, budget levels are?
That's not the perception of most Winnipeggers.
But I'm explaining the reality of the process.
Well, do you agree, Councillor, that it's quite embarrassing to request that a department make cuts, for that department to refuse to make cuts, and that for City Council to sort of roll over and backtrack and say, okay, fine, we were wrong. You don't have to make any cuts. I mean, it's quite humorous for all Winnipeggers, and it's tragic, of course, for people who are going to be policed without access to any kind of public services in the city.
Oh, and I know this situation of which you're speaking, and thank you for raising that. But again, for clarification, during the finance meeting that took place on November 12th, the service was asked to provide options on reducing the $3 million. They were asked to take out of their budget within 6 weeks of the end of the year, which would represent approximately $1 million a week. And the only options that were available would have been to either service cuts through layoffs, which there is a notice period required as a part of the collective bargaining agreement, which potentially would have cost the city and the service more money by way of severance packages. Or the other alternative is to furlough the service for the balance for a month and not have any police response at all. So again, those were the only two options that were on the table that were not viable in terms of public safety.
Thank you for filling me in. I wasn't aware of those details, Councillor. I'm curious, why is the only option to furlough the entire police force? Why can't a segment of the police force be furloughed?
Because again, dealing with 600 and, the previous year, 624,000 calls for service, we're seeing an increased demand for service. But, furloughing the service for that month would have reduced the cost by $3 million in a period of time when we're seeing an increased call for service. So
we're also seeing increased calls for service in libraries, in community centers, on sidewalks to be plowed, in parks. We're seeing increased calls for service in all manner of city provided services. So
we have to manage the expectations of residents in terms of where their priorities are. And 68% of Winnipeggers do support Winnipeg Police Service and public safety objectives. So thank you very much.
Question? Okay.
Sure. Sorry. Do you have a further comment?
No, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Owen. Please have a great day.